We have sold our home, our heritage designated property in the city, as we have discovered that we aren't city folks anymore, and we'll be sharing our new destination in January. And we have some very exciting news. I was really excited to find this new Plush Big chunky yarn. It's very similar to a tube yarn, but the diameter is a little bit smaller. And the beautiful part, it's machine washable and dryable. I want to show you how quick and easy it is to use this yarn. First thing I've done is created a slip knot, and this is going to be the slip knot to start a chain of stitches. All you're going to do is pull a loop through a loop. So you're going to grab that working yarn and pull it through each loop you create. So to start this throw blanket, I started with 43 stitches. I try to make each loop about 3 inches in diameter. But the nice part about this yarn is it's got different variations of size throughout the skein. So it's going to be part of the charm of the blanket not to feel too concerned about the size of your loops, as they're going to change on their own a little bit anyhow. You definitely don't want to make your stitches too tight, or the blanket will actually kind of turn out a little bit too stiff. So you kind of want to make those loops fairly loose. Once I get to the end of the chain, that last stitch is actually going to be part of the next row. So I'm going to go back, creating loops from that top bump all the way across as my first row of stitches. And doing this all by hand, and as you can see how thick it is, it stitches up very quickly. Not only is this really thick and plush, it's really easy to learn how to hand knit, especially if you have no experience. Because of the size, it's so much easier to see exactly what you're doing. My start chain of loops was 42. That last stitch ended up becoming the first stitch coming back. Now I've come back with my first row of stitches, and even that slip knot will count as a stitch. I generally like to make it very easy for myself by just pulling the working yarn in the direction I'm going to continue. And all you're going to do is keep repeating the exact same thing by pulling the working yarn through your loops. You definitely want to be careful that your loops don't twist. So as you carry on in each row, just kind of reconfirm that your yarn is not making a twist, so that way everything will have a uniform to it. And this is the sole basis of the entire blanket. All you're doing is creating loops and pulling the working yarn through each loop. And again, I'm just gauging approximately about 3 inches per loop. This yarn is very smooth, so creating these loops goes very, very quickly, and because of the size of it, it stitches up extremely fast. The entire project took me under 4 hours to create, and I used 8 balls of the super plush yarn. I like to make my throw blankets a little bit more on the larger size, so this one turned to approximately 4 feet by 5 feet. When you get to the end row of each row of stitches you do, when you go for your next row, it's okay to stitch one right after another on the same row, but just make sure you've created the loop that catches. So I find it really helpful to make sure that my working yarn is in position to the direction that I will be working in. Once you have about half a dozen rows, you'll start to have a little bit of weight onto the blanket, which will then help the stitches form a little bit easier. Right now, it's a little bit flimsy as you get started. You may have to pull and kind of contort your stitches a little bit until the blanket starts to have that little bit of weight on it. This is such a relaxing project to create, and it takes no time at all. Once you've completed each row, I find it again really helpful to take the working yarn and move it into the direction I am now going to be working in. This will help uniform your stitches. And as you can see, pulling up the loops, I just grab it with my thumb and pull the working yarn through the actual loop. It's really quick and easy. You can see what it looks like to the back, and I find what it looks like is rows of braids, but this is considered the knit stitch. The fun part about these super thick plush yarns is not only do they stitch up extremely quick and easy, doing it by hand, you don't need any tools. When you start your chain of stitches, I started with 43, that will determine the width of my blanket. So you can start with any number you would like. So if you'd like to make it a little smaller or you would like to make it bigger, you can just either add less or more stitches on your chain. The number of rows you create will determine the length of the blanket. Not so much the width, but how long it will be. And again, you can make as many rows as you want or as many rows as the yarn will take that you have. And I used 8 balls of this yarn to create what I consider a large size blanket of 4 feet by over 5 feet. The other beautiful part about this yarn is it pulls into shape, and it's really easy to detect and count exactly how many rows you've done. To attach a new ball of yarn, I just make 2 knots, and I pull fairly firm on those knots. And once I've created the second portion of the knot, I'm just going to cut off those 2 tails. Making the knot as small as possible will make it as inconspicuous. And because this is such a thick yarn, you won't even see it once you continue knitting. I try to cut the tails as close to the knot as possible, and that's going to make the knot even smaller. But as you can see, as I continue on, you can't even see because the loops are so big, you won't even see it. The other thing that's fantastic about this yarn is you can throw it in the washing machine and the dryer. I just recommend delicate and cool cycles. As I mentioned, the diameter of the actual yarn is always changing in size, so it's not always equal as you keep knitting through the balls of yarn. So this creates almost a little bit of texture because of the size throughout the entire knit stitch. But it's pretty incredible that you can create this entire project in less than an afternoon. Because of the size of this blanket, I actually prefer to work at table level. So what I will do is I will actually fold as the blanket grows, so this way I can work at table level throughout the entire project. And what I found is if you let it drape over the table, the weight of the blanket keeps pulling. So if you fold it right in half and fold the sides as you continue. So now that I'm about 3.5 hours into this blanket, I want to show you how easy it will be to cast off your stitches. At this point in the project, I've had to fold the blanket twice in order to keep working at the table. But I'm only on my last few rows, and you definitely want to make sure that you leave enough yarn so you can cast off your stitches, and it's really easy to do. Because of the type of yarn, this tube style yarn, I find it really helpful to give the whole blanket a really good stretch as well once you're finished. So I'm going to take that last loop, so I'm not starting a new row. I'm going to take 2 loops, pull the working yarn through, create 1 loop, pick up the next loop, pull the working yarn through, create 1 loop. And you're now creating kind of like a braid across the top, and this is how you're going to cast off your blanket. So again, you'll have a loop, you'll pick up the next loop, pull the working yarn through. I just sandwich them together, pull the working yarn through, and just basically you're removing a loop every time you do this. And this is going to take you back, creating an entire row, and all your stitches are attached together. When you get to the very last loop, all you're going to do is cut off the remainder of any working yarn and you'll create a knot. I actually like to create 2 knots. So what I'll do is create an end knot here. Then with any remainder of the tail, I weave it through and then I tuck it underneath a stitch and create another knot. Then I'll cut off any remainder, and this will just help secure the end. And I do the exact same thing for the beginning of the slip knot tail, so that's at the other end of the blanket. But this is an extremely warm and thick plush blanket, and to make this in about 4 hours was a lot of fun, easy, and even a little therapeutic. I am really glad we moved to the island. It is so surreal, it is so beautiful. And I was really excited to move back into the city. But in my time there, it just really didn't work for me. So I'm really excited about the upcoming move, and I'm gonna share all the details with you in just a couple of weeks. Plus another special surprise. Thank you so much for watching this week's video, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. Until then, take care.